Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This is a session organized by PyData, Milton, Keynes, and today we'll be diving into geospatial visualization with Python, web scraping, and Folium with the competent Hugh Evans. But before we go into the discussion, um, my name is Grace, and I'm the organizer for PyData Milton Keynes. I can see Philip. He is the co-organizer for PyData Milton Keynes. Philip, do you have any words to say? Do you want to say hello to the house? Um, let's hear from you, Philip.
Hello everyone. I'm super excited to be here today, joining all the way from China, regardless. And I think we're still going to introduce the speaker and we're still going to talk more about the events there. But I just wish to welcome everyone. The the attendance is huge and the energy is huge. We're all eager to learn and let's keep the spirit. We're going to learn a lot today. And thank you. Welcome everyone.
Thank you so much, Philip, for that. Thank you so much for that. So who are we as PyData Milton Keynes? PyData Milton Keynes is a local chapter of a global PyData community network. It is supported by NomFocus. NomFocus is a help organization for open source and data projects. This is a welcoming space to use and build data tools, share ideas, learn from each other. If you have something in mind that you'd like to share with the community, please reach out so that we can plan something for you to have a platform to share. What's our mission? We want to build a community around practical, real world, data work, best practices, new approaches, emerging technologies in data management, analytics, and visualization. We want to be a community that puts a spotlight to the things that matter, to you when we are talking about real world projects. That's what we do here at PyData Milton Keynes. What kind of topics interest us? Topics around data science, Python for data, open source, analytics, visualization, machine learning, data mining, big data, statistical computing, whatever we, throw in the mix for us to have this wide industry, that gives us the advances that we have in technology and data today. Please, 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 this is the stop to have that conversation. We're only a chapter. Milton Keynes is a chapter. There are other chapters. I will advise look into the nearest PyData, community around you. If you would prefer an on-site event. We are really excited to have you on today's meeting, speaking to us as we go into another topic that looks into the community of, data work. And we are so grateful for our sponsors, NomFocus. They've made this happen. They brought all of us together to have conversations that matter like this. We would like for you to join our community, follow us on LinkedIn. We're also on Meetup. So we would advise that you follow us on Meetup so that you have announcements for when events like this is going on. You can also see recordings of some of our events that we've had in the past on YouTube. I can promise you it is going to, change the way you see what we do in-house, and that might encourage you to join our next event as well. We would like to see in the chat, where are you joining us from? I see we've had more people join now. I just want to have in the chat, where exactly are you joining us from before I hand us over to Philip to introduce the speaker for today. Yes, there will be the recording will be available and will be on our YouTube channel. I will advise that you subscribe so that when the recording does go up, you will be notified and you would have access to seeing it. We would also be sending the YouTube link to everyone that has RSVP'd today of the recording of today's session, just so that you have that as well as a reference. We are so grateful that you've decided to spend your evening with us. I'm going to be handing you over to Philip as he introduces us to the speaker of the day. I'm sure he is excited and ready to give us a deep dive into geospatial visualization. Philip, over to you.
All right, so good evening, everyone. Using our UK time, and it's very awesome that we have people from all over the world, different regions and different countries, join us this evening. Today's session is titled Geospatial Visualization with Python, Web Scraping, and Folium, and we'll be exploring different web scraping techniques with Python Folium library to create geospatial visualization, especially when you have to do with data that has to do with coordinates, location, um, and mapping out where things are. So this will be very valuable skill for anyone that's looking at location-based data. All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce Huge Evans. Yes, Huge Evans is a senior developer advocate at Ivan, and where he works at at the intersection of open source. He works cloud data infrastructure, developer communities. He's a developer advocate, and his career spans, through cloud engineering, technical consulting, developer relations across data and the AI sector. All right. So beyond his daily job, he's committed to building tech communities, and he's a founder and organizer of AI Signals, which is a community focused based on real world AI applications. And he also serves as an organizer for PyData London, which is one of our larger body, and one of the leading data science communities. So Huge is a former apprentice and advocate, and he's we are very pleased to welcome him to today's event. And Huge, please take the floor and
Great stuff. Well, thank you for the warm welcome, and thank you for having me today. I'm just going to share my screen. Cool. So yeah, as Philip mentioned, I am a developer advocate at Ivan. We're a company that sells managed data services for things like databases and Kafka. We'll get more into Kafka later on. But my role is to help people build things with data, and to build things to show people what they can do with our technology. Today, I'm going to be talking about a personal project I've been working on, partly in my role as an organizer at PyData London, where I help look after the meetup and our conference, and some of the stuff that I learned along the way. But first things first, why am I, aside from working with data professionally, like why am I talking to you about maps today? I really like maps. I think that's as good as reason as any. I'm actually doing this talk from home today, which is nice because you can see some of the maps in question behind me. I've joked when I've done versions of this talk previously that I had intended to put a lot of the maps I collect on a slide, and it was kind of an embarrassingly large number. So there's 3 or 4 on the wall behind me. There's several on the wall in front of me. It's a lot of maps. I like maps a lot because I think they're a very interesting way of exploring data and space. And they can be very inspiring to like explore, like a landscape, like a museum, a country. Like a map, I think, is like an invitation to kind of come up with adventures and places to go and to find patterns in data. So I like maps a lot. And today's talk was kind of inspired by one map in particular, which is this map of all of the PyData groups in the UK. So at the PyData London meetup, much like Grace and Philip kicked off this event today, we usually have a little bit of housekeeping, and we encourage people to go and visit other PyData communities in the UK. And this is, until very recently, the map we used. So this is pulled from Meetup Pro, which is the tool that NumFocus use to promote and share all of the different PyData groups. it's a pretty good map, and it actually sort of inspired me to do what I'm doing at the moment, which is trying to speak at every different PyData group in the UK in 1 year. Basically, as kind of a challenge to myself, but also because it means I get to meet all the different cool people in the PyData community, which is super fun. But this map isn't without its problems. You can't see easily how many meetups there are per city. There is actually one city in the UK that has two different PyData meetups, or at least sort of, but we'll touch on that more later. There's no indication of groups are still active. We have a lot of PyData groups in the UK, but unfortunately, some of them haven't hosted events in a while, like Cambridge. PyData Katsina is on the wrong continent. Do shout if you know where Katsina is, but it's not in Norwich. PyData Cornwall is in the sea. It should actually be in Newquay. And there's actually another fifth problem with this map, which we'll touch on in a little bit. So, an inspiring map, but not a perfect map. I have a bit of a reputation for complaining about Meetup. I've given a lightning talk about it previously, and if you like me are someone who enjoys complaining about Meetup, do check it out. But rather than do my usual shtick of pointing at Meetup at bending spoons, the company that owns them, and going, "Oh, these guys don't know how to write software," I thought I would try and solve this problem and make a better map. So this is what I came up with. Um, this is the same map that you saw from Meetup Pro, except I've taken the data from that map and I've cleaned it up to fix some of the issues we had. So you'll notice that all of the cities are actually in the correct location now. The Meetup Pro map has this weird issue where like all of the cities end up being sort of 20 or 30 miles north of where they're supposed to be. I'm not entirely sure why, but I fixed that and cleaned up the data, and I'll touch on how in a moment. And I've also created this secondary map that shows activity. So you can see like meetups shown in green have events scheduled, dark blue events that had an event recently, and they get fainter the longer it's been since the last event. So these maps were very useful for me, especially as someone who was sitting down to try and like plan this journey around all the different PyData groups in the UK. And I hope they'll be useful for other people who are looking for nearby PyData communities that they want to visit, like Grace suggested. Um, but this was not a trivially easy problem. And let's dive into now, like how I went about doing this. So I'm going to jump over to Marimo. Let me know if you can't see this. I think hopefully this should work. Marimo, if you're not familiar with it, it's a lot of Jupyter notebooks. It's an IPython like IDE, and yeah, it's really good. I like it a lot. It treats all of the different cells as like a function, so it's very useful for building demos and exploring code. So let's take a look now at how this project works. The IDE name, so this is Marimo. So Marimo is like an alternative IPython runtime, I guess. So it's slightly different to Jupyter Notebooks in terms of the way it's implemented, but it looks very similar. And it has some really cool features in it, and I'll take a look at some of those in a minute. But yeah, as someone who spends a lot of time working with Python and data, as you might be unsurprised by at a PyData meetup, I really like this tool. Not affiliated with them in any way. It's just very useful. So I have this notebook here for explaining the data, but I'm going to jump into some of the actual code here. I'm just going to drag this across to make it a bit bigger. So as Philip mentioned, I ended up scraping for this data. I took a different approach to this for the later versions of this project, but initially I'm scraping with Playwright. So Playwright is a web scraping tool that allows you to spin up a browser headlessly. So here I'm using Chromium, and then load web pages as if you're looking at them in a browser normally, dump all the HTML, and then store it for later use. So it's not especially easy to get across on screen because one of the issues with scraping from a website like Meetup is that it's very clunky. The pages are not very consistently laid out. Sometimes there are fields missing from the data. Here I am just scraping from, if I can just open this, I can just show you quickly the actual page I'm scraping from. Meetup Pro PyData map. So in this section of the Meetup Pro map, you can see all of the different upcoming events and groups in the PyData network. So what this code is doing is scrolling through this page and collecting all the groups. So here I have playwright functions that are loading the URL into Playwright, loading an instance of it headlessly so it doesn't flash up on screen, and then going through and scrolling down the page, loading all of the elements and dumping that as HTML. I can then use this all groups set to use regexes to pull out all of the different parameters for each of the groups. So this is a very inelegant solution. This is what I landed on initially, but it did work for pulling out the records I wanted, which was groups, their location, any events they had upcoming, and to dump that into a CSV file so I could start mapping. So I had a few different functions like this. I wrote this one to get all of the groups from the page I showed you before. I wrote this one that loads the URL of a specific group page and pulls all of the pieces of information from it. Again, this is very messy code. This is very much a case of like trial and error and finding something that kind of worked. And I'll talk in a bit more about a better solution for this. But this was my web scraping code. And then I cache all of the data I've scraped, the actual records, to a CSV file. So that was like my starting point, and that helped me recreate the existing map one for one, but it didn't fix any of my data problems. So what I did was I used another tool called GeoPy. So GeoPy is a really useful Python module that lets you handle map data. So you can work with coordinates, you can work with like border data, and it lets you pull in a variety of tools for working this kind of data. And one of the ones I used here was Nematim. So Nematim is a geoencoding library. And what that means is I can call out to the Nematim API with this module with the name or the address of a meetup, and I can get coordinates back. The reason why I wanted to do this is because the coordinates in the official Meetup Pro map are wrong for some reason, as I mentioned before, on Meetup's end. So by taking the city and the country name for each of the groups, I could re-geoencode it to get an accurate set of coordinates for that group to place it in the right city, in the right country, and clean up my data. And so if I scroll through here, and also because Nematim is an API that's like publicly maintained, it's open source. Sorry, question in chat. Actually, this is useful. Does Playwright allow you to log into the website if it needs authentication? Yes, but you can't sign in to Meetup using Playwright because Meetup explicitly blocks the headless browser. You could use Playwright in non-headless mode and then sign in and use it like that. But that's quite awkward. All of the data we want for creating a map is publicly available and scrapable in this way, and the robots.txt for Meetup, which governs rules for like bots and scraping, actually allows you to collect data in this way. But yeah, you can authenticate, but it's trickier than the approach we're using here. Yes, Playwright is often used for web testing, but because Playwright is very powerful, you can also use it for scraping. So here I'm using Playwright to load the page and then do operations like scrolling down, because Meetup doesn't load all the groups at one go. And it doesn't really expose a clean list of the groups, at least through looking at the site. So yes, all of this code is on my GitHub. I'll share a link with the group afterwards and you'll be able to check it out. Oh, you're very welcome. So I'm very nearly done scrolling through this code. I appreciate this isn't super much to look at. The other thing I did in here was create a cache. So we're not hitting the Nematim API for every PyData group in the UK every time we run the script. I cached the result in a JSON, and then I check that cache every time I look for the longitude and latitude of a group, just so I'm only making API calls when I need to. Like, for example, when a new group is added. And that is how initially I built this data set of group name, the city that the group is in, the longitude and latitude, and some information about how many members and how many events. And that lets us jump back over to Marimo here, and we can start looking at building these maps. So I have my CSV file that I built using the methods I just described. And again, I'll share this code afterwards if you want to look at it in more detail, with those records in it. And these are just some helper functions for loading. And we can see this data here. So on the Meetup Pro map page, we actually have every Meetup group that's in the Meetup Pro network, the PyData Pro network on Meetup. So we get a bunch of different groups. And we can see here, like, one of these things I really like about Marimo is, like, if I load CSV data, Marimo understands that the data frame that we're loading our CSV data into with pandas is tabular, and it gives us these little visualizations. So I can see, like, oh, like the rating for most groups is pretty good, which we're glad to see. Most groups have, a low number of members, and we can see these kind of like outliers in here. And you can sort and filter as well, which is super nice. So actually what I want to sort by is members. I want to clear this filter. Cool. So I want to search for members descending. Usually this is pretty good. I think I've confused it by clicking too many things, but it gives us this really nice interactive view. So we have all this data. Now we can start mapping it. Because I wanted to create a few different maps, I put together a few helper functions. Folium is really good. So usually the way we work with creating mapping visualizations is you have these tile sets that show all the different map sections. So these are available often like open source, and there's a few like paid options. But you have like, how do I do pre-processing? So right now, for the part we're talking about, this is just a Python script. So and to keep things up to date, I have it running with a GitHub action. So every day the GitHub action runs, it hits the Meetup Pro map page, scrapes all the data, puts it all in a CSV, and then I just have a few functions to go through, check for any new groups and geoencode them if they exist, and to filter out any like bad data, or to flag any issues. This particular approach for this map isn't super elegant, but later on I'll touch on some better approaches for this with data modeling. So I have these helper functions. Folium is great. You can work with this open tile data, but it is a little bit basic in terms of like building the kind of like interesting and like interactive map that I want here. So I have these helper functions that inject some HTML. So here I have this like fillable UI element that has the number of group members, the city, and all of this. So like when you mouse over a map marker, it'll have this data. And then I have some basic options for styling. So we saw before, like recreating existing map with just red circles. And then we have the activity layers, all of these different like styles I'm kind of pre-preparing so I can use them when I create my maps. Now I can come down here, I can use Folium, and because we've done this pre-work to set up the function, I can share the presentation with the repo afterwards as well. So because I've done this pre-work to set up these functions, now I can just use the Folium create map option, passing my helper functions and the style, and then I get the map. And here we go. So we've recreated the meetup map, and again with the data cleanup that we've done previously. There's a couple of nice things in here, like for cities with two different groups, we now have this clustering, which is configurable. So this is, you pass in the number of pixels between two groups, and if they're less than that amount, they get merged into a group like this, and you can click on them and have both. So you can see in Copenhagen, you've got the Julia meetup, and you've got PyData Copenhagen, and now we can see both, which is nice. And all of these meetups are in the correct location. I also have the activity map. Again, this is super simple. I just have my style function, and I'm multiplying the like radius of the group by the size of the members, so I can see big groups. Applying green to groups with events scheduled, blue to groups with that don't have events scheduled, and they get fainter the longer it's been to the last event. So this is starting to be quite useful for me for thinking about like, oh, I want to go visit all these different PyData groups in the UK. You'll notice this map is very green. That's in part because the PyData London conference has been reposted by a lot of communities, but also like the UK is very active for PyData groups, which is very cool. I'll touch more on this inactive map later. But one of the like upshots of this project, as I reached this point, was I was like, oh, so I've collected all this data to mapping, but it now means I have this this big data set of information about all the PyData groups in the world, which is very cool. So I can come in and start doing queries. So I can look at like, oh, what are the most active groups for PyData in the world? And I'm defining activity as like the number of events over time they've held. So Berlin is very active. Like in the time that they've been around, they've had 140 events, which is very impressive. That's more than one a month for some years for them. So that's incredible. London very active. Manchester very active. So, and also there's some very active groups in the Philippines that have been around very recently, but have still hosted lots of groups. So that was a cool thing to see in the data. We can also see some of the biggest groups in the world. London being the biggest, which is we're very proud of. So London has something like 16,000 members. Iceland unfortunately does not have a PyData group included in this map, but I'll show you another map later where you might be able to find some Python data science in Iceland while you're there. So we can see all of this data, which is super cool. Meetup doesn't let you do this. Meetup has the data, but they don't expose it for you to make these kind of free form queries. But yeah, I was very excited to have this data. I know I'm probably not alone with people on this call today, but when you take the effort to collect data and clean it up so you can start like seeing patterns in it and start like playing with it, it's very, very interesting. You're like, oh, I can ask this question, I can ask this question of my data. One thing I found particularly interesting was I was like, oh, just for the sake of experimentation, let's do a group by on country for total number of groups. And I was like pleasantly surprised to find that in the UK, we actually have the most PyData groups of anywhere in the world. So, like a pat on the back to everyone in the UK PyData community for that one. It was at this point I realized I probably got myself in at the deep end in terms of speaking at all of these groups. But I was like very excited to be like, oh, like we have a very active community, even more so than the US where NumFocus is actually based. So that is kind of my like first approach that I took to this project. And it helped introduce a lot of the basic concepts that I then used to build out more maps later on. But working with these ideas of, Folium for mapping, geoencoding for cleaning up data, and working with clustering and visualization to kind of build this kind of legible map with these kind of custom styles. It would help if I could get that. Cool. So having collected all this data, I could sit down and start planning my journey around the UK, and then I could create another map to track my progress. And I was like super happy with it. So I'm like, great, like I have a map that I can use to figure out which groups are active that I could go speak at. This map has a link to like the information for the organizers, so I can get in touch with them really easily. Again, I just built this with Folium, and I just added an extra layer of styling where I have a CSV where I can add like the dates of places that I've agreed to speak and all the places I have and haven't spoken at. I need to update this actually because I'm like 4 groups in now. So chugging along nicely towards that goal. You'll notice not all 21 groups are here, and you'll also potentially notice that there is PyData Dublin. I added that in. Obviously, Dublin isn't part of the UK, but I was like, oh, it would be cool to go to Dublin, and they have a really awesome team of organizers. So I'm looking forward to kind of making my way over there at some point later this year. I filtered out groups that are inactive. So unfortunately, Cambridge hasn't had an event in a while, likewise with Birmingham. But what I have now is a list of active groups that I can kind of plan my journey around. I imagine some people would already be like, oh, you could like traveling salesman with this data. Mostly I'm planning around work commitments at the moment, but if you wanted to like do the fastest route around all of the PyData in the UK, you potentially could with this data set. I mentioned before, though, I had issues with the meetup map, and obviously I built my my new maps, and I'm enjoying them a lot, and they're very useful. But at this point in the project, I present the map I've made to the PyData London community. I do a little lightning talk, and I run into a secret fifth problem with my data. PyData Edinburgh is missing. I remember being a little bit surprised that there was only one meetup from PyData in Scotland when I first pulled all this data together in Glasgow. And I was like, oh, like, I would have thought there'd be one in Edinburgh. And after I gave my talk at PyData London about this project, Stelios, some from the audience, like raised an issue on GitHub and said, hey, you're missing Edinburgh. I was like, oh yeah, I guess I must have missed it. Like I'm scraping, but maybe I'm not scrolling down far enough down the page or something. And I went and I manually added Edinburgh. I found the URL for the Edinburgh group, and I realized that Edinburgh isn't included in the Pro Network. So if you're not familiar with Pro Networks on Meetup, they are a way of organizations to basically pay for a bunch of different groups all in one go. So NumFocus uses it. All of the official PyData groups are included in that network. But as this issue raised, there are some PyData groups that either are like no longer active or are being organized by people other than NumFocus, I guess, that aren't in this group. And it's actually quite a lot. This is also another map that's out of date. There has been some like rejigging of how NumFocus is sponsoring groups, so there's actually a lot more groups on this map now. But these are all meetup groups that are like described as being PyData in their name, but not part of the official network. I found these groups via a very like caveman approach of taking the list of all of the cities in the world. By the way, if you're looking for data sets like that, like a list of every city ordered by size, the NASA website bizarrely has a lot of data like that. It's very useful. Like it's available for free. So if like me, you're trying to do like a brute force search of the Meetup website, looking for groups that contain PyData and then like some city name, you can just like grab a file like that and run all the way through. It's like super useful. So yeah, this was not necessarily super relevant to my project of speaking in the UK, but was kind of an interesting oddity in this data set. And it kind of leaves me wondering, like, some of these groups are very large. They have lots of members, and they're in major cities like Tokyo and Edinburgh. There's lots in Switzerland. Like, maybe some of these groups will get revived someday. Who knows? I like to be optimistic. Oh yeah, and this is the updated version of this map where like there's a lot of groups on it now because NumFocus went and weeded some of the inactive groups so they could direct that money elsewhere. At this point in the project, I built my very clunky web scraping code that I've showed you before, and that was enough for me to get this map of PyData groups. But now I'm thinking, oh, like, what if I could map all of the different meetup groups I'm interested in, not just the PyData ones, and maybe I could map groups on Luma or like other event platforms as well. So I sat down and my day job, I'm a data engineer. I talk about data engineering, and I was like, right, I can figure out this problem. I can build like a general case script to fetch groups. I can store them all in Postgres because the CSV file is not going to cut it anymore with this many groups. I can have a function that will generate updated maps that will run periodically, and then I can serve that map from GitHub pages or from some other free web host. And I sit down and I start putting this together. And I realize there are a couple of big bottlenecks that I need to deal with before I can get this like anywhere near a large number of meetup groups or, all the meetup groups on Meetup. One of them is the way I'm using the Meetup API is very stupid. It's very the way I'm using the Meetup and scraping it is very stupid. It's very slow. It's very inefficient. It takes like 2 or 3 seconds because I'm rate limiting myself to make sure I'm not hammering Meetup too fast and violating their robots.txt. And also, I have a process blocking problem. So I can run one script that talks to Meetup, but it means I can only have one process that's collecting groups and doing stuff at a time. So there are a few different things that I tried to fix this. One of them was I actually went and had a look properly into Meetup's API. Now, I hadn't used the API previously, which did come back to haunt me. But Meetup moved from using a REST API where you have, get and fetch endpoints that provided all the data about all the different groups to a GraphQL API. If you're not familiar, GraphQL is a way of like representing data as a graph with a series of edges and vertices. And for some data, it's very useful, particularly if you are trying to understand connections between things. But for Meetup and for data about groups and events, it can feel a bit clunky. It's not very well documented. So I'd kind of avoided it up until this point. At this point, the project anyway had to kind of bite the bullet and figure it out. I spent a lot of time figuring out gaps in Meetup's documentation to get it working. And I got to a point where I could change my busted web scraping code into building GraphQL queries, figuring out the hashes, which are basically like a simplified version of those queries that kind of can sort of speed up the querying process and saves you having to send like massive GraphQL queries over the web and get the data that way. And I can put that into Postgres, I can put that into PyData, I can put that in my map, and I could start gradually increasing the number of groups I was scraping from. But after I'd manually added, a bunch of different pro network groups on Meetup that I was interested in, I was finding that this process was taking too long. Like it was taking like 10 hours to scrape all the different groups, which was way too slow. And again, I'm a data engineer. I work with Kafka very extensively. So I was like, oh, I know how to solve this problem. So if you're not familiar with Kafka, Kafka is often associated with streaming, but Kafka is a distributed lock. And so what that means is it is a append-only, strongly ordered series of messages that can be read and written by processes. In Kafka world, we call that producing and consuming to Kafka. And the distributed nature of it is that you have multiple Kafka brokers that each keep copies of your data. And you write messages to a topic. A topic is kind of like a list of messages. You read from that at a particular offset, and those topics are replicated across Kafka brokers in the form of partitions. So that if you lose one broker, you don't lose your data, and also so that your different processes in your architecture can talk to any of the different brokers and get the data. So Kafka is a really useful tool if you want to separate different components of your architecture and have data flow between them. And in this case, I'm using Kafka, and here I have all of my different Kafka topics labeled, as a way of separating out my process for collecting data. So let me sort of talk you through this revised architecture. So now I have a new process called seed. Seed goes and collects a list of different meetup groups using a pre-cached list of them that I found previously. It's very easy to find all of the different Meetup Pro networks. It's harder to find individual groups. You have to go and kind of query for like city and topic, but you can do all of that ahead of time. You'll need to do it once or occasionally to keep that data fresh. And then you can push all of that data into a Kafka topic. And then in the middle, I have these new processes that I can deploy and run on a computer anywhere. Right now, Ivan, we just launched this new like apps thing where you can have like you can write a little Dockerized application and then run it on a cloud. I was using other computer at this point in time because we hadn't released it, but this means that I can take my big scraping process, which is this like monolith, and is really slow, and I can break it up into a bunch of smaller processes, and I can scale it horizontally so that I can read data from more events from the API and from more groups at the API at the same time. Once these processes collect the data, they then write it into 3 more Kafka topics for events, groups, and venues. And then all of that data gets consumed by a sink. So that pulls all the data out of Kafka and it puts it into our database in Postgres. So we can use all of the same existing logic we had before for making maps. This is a big jump in complexity from just having one script that does everything. But it gives us a lot of like new possibilities here, right? At this point in the project, I'd realized that there's something like 3 million meetup groups total. I'm far from scraping all of them yet, But with this process, I can keep adding more of these nodes in the middle, and I can dramatically increase the amount of scripting I can do. And I can spread a lot of the new work that we incur from this approach. So you'll notice now I've added venues. So one of the things I wanted to do for mapping all of the groups is to show the actual like real world location, not just like the city and country. But to do that, you have to get the venue from the event, and then you have to geo-encode that venue address to get a latitude and longitude so you can plot it. That's a lot of geo-encoding. So what we can do is instead of hitting the native API, we can run our own geo-encoding service and we can distribute it across all of these different processes. So if we come across a new venue that hasn't been cached, the geoencoding process of doing a big lookup to find the right longitude and latitude doesn't block us completely. Like only one of these nodes at a time is going to be waiting for that data, and the rest are collecting information from new groups. So this is pretty good. But I was actually using the free tier Kafka service that we have at IBM. Our claim to fame is that we're the only people in the world with a fully free tier Kafka, like free for life. But it has this limit of 2 partitions per topic. So that means that for my groups to scrape, I have 2 partitions, which is 2 different files that each contain the data spread across 2 brokers. Now, this is a problem, and we're getting into the weeds of Kafka a little bit here, because a very common question people have when they're running Kafka is like, oh, like how many partitions should I have per topic? The number of partitions you have has very drastic performance implications. And the big problem I ran into here is that you kind of want 1 partition per process that's producing or consuming. So having this 2 partition limit meant that I could kind of only run 2 workers here. So I upgraded to our new jet tier that we have at Ivan, which is, I think it's something like $20 a month. Luckily, if you work for a data company, you get a certain amount of credits for free, which is nice. So that means that I can run all of this on the company service for free still. But this meant I could add as many partitions as I want. I think it's like up to 100 or something. And this meant I could keep adding more and more worker processes. So this let me scale further and increase the number of like parallel workers I could have collecting this data, geoencoding this data, pushing it to Postgres so I can build maps with it. And you can see here, this is kind of where I'm at the moment. So this is the dashboard. I built a Grafana dashboard to keep track of Kafka and all my different processes, because now I have this big distributed architecture. I need to keep tabs on it, see if it breaks. So this is it not running. Usually this would say like three workers. And you can see now in 6 hours, I can scrape 21,000 groups from Meetup and also from Luma now as well, because I can add workers that talk to Luma specifically and use different API stuff in 6 hours. And this gets all of their past events. It gets all of their addresses. It geoencodes them if it hasn't seen them previously. And it gives me this massive data set now where I've gone from just having 137 PyData groups to having 22,000 groups on all different types of topics. And I can show you what this looks like now. I think someone was mentioning Iceland previously. Oh, that's my emails. Okay, cool. So I'm involved in organizing a community for community organizers called Not Another Pizza. And we basically are a bunch of people who organize communities and we help each other out. I stuck this on our website, which is this search. So I collected all of this data. I'm building maps with this data, and I wanted to make it so you could explore it. This is all working basically the same as our first data set with PyData in terms of building a big table with geo-encoded values. But now we just have much more groups, and we've used our more kind of enterprisey architecture to do that in that 6-hour window rather than like 3 or 4 days as it would have taken if I was just running it on my laptop. So someone mentioned Iceland. So let's say I want to find meetups that are in Iceland. And let's say they're also about Python. Oh, okay, no joy. Right, let's just check for Iceland then, shall we? So I can pick if I want groups or events, and then I go to the map, which is obviously my favorite part. Oh, you've got one community in Reykjavik. Okay, 50 skills, whatever that is. So whoever is on there, Dixon, who's on your journey to Iceland, I think that might be the only one you got. Granted, I don't think I'm scraping every meetup just yet, but yeah, you can see on the map. In fact, if I get rid of the Iceland filter, we might see a few more. Let's see, yeah, that is certainly the only meetup in Iceland. So there you go. Oh, in fact, actually, oh no, there's a few more. Okay, I think I need to do some work on disambiguating between like English and like other languages as well. But you can see you've got a few different communities here, lots of different travel stuff. There's a Houdini user group. That's cool. It's a 50 silicon we found before, but yeah, so you can see now we have kind of the same view we have with our PyData groups previously, but because we have this more robust data infrastructure, we can do this for a much larger number of groups, and then we can build this like explorable set, and we can start like looking at this data in aggregate as well with all the same queries we were running previously, which I don't know, I find very exciting. Hopefully you can see here like quite how many groups there are. You can see concentrations in different cities. You can see these far-flung groups in far-flung places like this Tromsø Java Bean group, which is very, very far north in Norway. So that's pretty much a wrap. Kind of a whistle-stop tour of this data. I'm trying to find where my slides have gone. Seem to have lost my slides. That's no good. Okay, here we go. So we've looked at how you can work with geodata in Python, how you can geo-encode data to get longitudes and latitudes that you can plot, some basic kind of data cleanup stuff using Marimo with pandas to like run queries against this data. Touch very briefly on Kafka and Postgres as to how you can scale like a data pipeline like that, how you can scale data scraping. There's lots of much better resources than me out there if you want to learn more about that. But before I wrap up with you guys very patiently listening to me, I want to leave you with one last map. So Grace, at the beginning of the meetup today, mentioned like, oh, you should check out your local PyData community, and like you definitely should. Like, I love PyData, I love being organized with PyData, and I've learned so much by being an attendee at meetups and listening to other people speak. And if you'd like to use any of the maps I've made to help find a group, like that would be awesome. I'll share a link to them afterwards. But this is one last map I made. So I spoke a bit about mapping active versus inactive groups, so that I could find which groups are actually hosting events and seek them out. This is a map of inactive PyData groups in the UK. It's a little misleading because some groups show as active, these like pale blue groups, because they've reposted PyData London conference that's coming up. But these two big red ones in here, Edinburgh and Birmingham, are like massive communities that just where we have PyData groups that haven't hosted an event in over 100 days. So as a final kind of like parting call to action to you, like go check out your local PyData group, go along, like attend, listen to talks, speak, maybe get involved as an organizer. Who knows? Like if your company's sponsoring, sponsor. But if you happen to be near or in Edinburgh or Birmingham, like check these groups out. They could really use your support. PyData is a great community, but it only exists as long as volunteers keep building it. So do check out these groups and see if you can support them if you can. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your time and listening to me talk about this project I've been working on. If you're interested in finding out more about how this project works and how you could use some of these techniques yourself, there's a full write-up on my blog. I know I'm showing QR codes here. I'll share some links on Meetup afterwards. I know that'll be a bit easier. I mentioned briefly we have a free tier for Kafka at Ivan. We also have free Postgres and a bunch of other services. If you, like me, are working on projects where you're kind of making that jump from scripts on your laptop to like bigger data architectures, or you want to learn new tools, it's a great way to learn. So do check that out. It's something that we're very proud of at Ivan, is that we support all these open source projects and we provide them for free for people who want to use them. And if you want to have a play around with the group search and the event search that I built on top of this data set, it's over at search.notanotherpizza. Awesome. That is everything from me. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you so much for having me.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Coach. That was great walking us through your experience, the approaches you took, um, the observations you had, and trying to provide solutions to your tour, trying to talk to all the PyData communities in the UK, and then seeing that the UK has one of the largest PyData communities. And you've introduced us to a number of tools, and we are very, very grateful for having you. I think now let's have questions. Do we have any questions, please? This time for questions. You can unmute yourself and just talk, or you can write it in the chat, please. Yeah, do we have questions?
I hope I haven't sent everyone to sleep with
Okay,
me talking about maths.
okay, yeah. I mean, there are some questions in the chat. Someone said, "Can this repository? Can we have the code?"
Yes, so I'll share links on Meetup in the event chat afterwards, and I can share them with you both, Grace and Philip, if you'd like to share them elsewhere. But all of these projects are available on my GitHub, both the All Meetup Groups project and the All PyData Groups project. I also have the event search and all the maps hosted if you just want to check them out as well. So I'll share links to all of that, as well as my write-up that goes into more detail about how all of this works.
Very good, thank you. After that, we're going to share the resources to all the attendees, right? Another question is, how did you host the project online? Which framework or service did you use?
So right now I'm using GitHub Pages. Pages is great. I like it a lot. In fact, we can pull this up very quickly. Maybe I can. There we go. Cool. So if you aren't aware, if you have a GitHub repo, Meetup gives you this option of enabling a service called Pages that turns the contents of your repo basically into like a web server. It's completely free as long as you're happy with it being publicly available, and you can configure like a custom domain name. So I just have like search another pizza here configured. I already own that domain through Cloudflare, so I can just add the subdomain and forward it here. It's great. I use it for all my projects, particularly ones like this that I want to like collaborate on with other people and like share in a public repo. It's just like a really useful way of doing it. For this particular project, I'm not using any particular framework for the site itself. I'm just using like plain HTML and CSS, mostly because I'm not really a web developer. There are definitely better ways of doing this. Like you could probably build something pretty cool with React for this. DataStar is a framework I've seen a lot of people talking about recently that lets you build very like responsive websites with Python. I definitely recommend checking that out. A lot of friends have been recommending it to me. But yeah, I just built it in HTML and CSS. All of the data look is in the map and in the search is just bundled to a JSON file behind the scenes. So the first time you load this page, you'll be like, oh, this is quite slow. It's because it's loading and caching like a 25 megabyte JSON file. But once it's done that, it means it's really quick. You just have all the data there in your browser cache. So yeah, that's how this is working here.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I don't know if we still have questions, but now let's look at what we have next. So what next? The PyData London 2026 is coming up. That will be on June, from 5th of June to 7th of June. Right. So just be on the watch out. You can go to the meetup group and then follow the link. It will take you to PyData London for you to sign up. So for our next event, we're looking at topics around agentic AI, MCP, and automation in practice. Just be on the lookout for call for speakers and the event flyer itself. But this is what we are looking at. We're hoping to do next time, and we are also hoping that to be an in-person event at Milton Keynes. Yeah, so this is what we're expecting next. And please, let's endeavor to register for PyData London 2026. I don't know if we still have questions. Um, If you have
I think
questions, let's see.
I can see a few in the chat. I'm happy to answer them now if that works for you guys, or I
Okay,
can
please
answer them
answer.
afterwards.
Yeah.
Sure. So yeah, selecting Folium for which reasons? Folium is very easy to use. It's quite limited, um, and you will have to use like another service if you want kind of non-standard map tiles. So for my kind of like silly Tour de PyData map, I have this nice kind of watercolor finish. So I'm using another service for that, which is Stadia Maps. So I'm like pulling that separately. So that's kind of a limitation of Folium, but it's very simple. It's very quick and easy to start making custom maps, so I definitely recommend it for that. On that recommendation for like map platforms or services question, um, I think I haven't done the broadest search for different tools, but certainly Folium very quick and easy to use. And Stadia Maps, they have a free API where you can load custom map tiles and different views. So they have a bunch of different satellite views, like heat data, weather data, whatever. So yeah, would recommend both of them. Uh, Limitations of this approach, data quality is very challenging here. Something I didn't touch on too much is I'm using Pydantic for data modeling. So I have an explicit model with all the different fields and types for each event and group that I'm expecting. So like uh, enforcing strict int on like members. Because I'm pulling this data from Meetup and Luma, which are like other platforms with their own rules around data, and they might change things. That model means that if they change the data and it breaks at the model enforcing layer instead of at the pipeline. So that's one limitation, is that like I'm reliant on upstream data. I can build whatever custom stuff I want to clean it up, but if they change it, then I have to manually come and fix it again. The other is that because I am manually discovering lists of groups and events, I don't have all the groups yet, and it's still very slow. It is not free to be running all of these different processes. Like I'm spending a little bit on compute, or I was before I moved to IBNAPs. So those are the main limitations for me. They are like vulnerability to upstream changes. Even with that Pydantic model to safeguard against it, you can still have breaking changes. Um, the kind of lack of like natural discoverability, and then just like the costs of running things at this kind of scale. Uh, which is GitHub. So GitHub here I'm using to store all of the code for both of these different projects, for the PyData map and for the All Meetup map, and also to host the actual live services for both. I think the recording was going out on the PyData Milton Keynes YouTube, if I'm not mistaken. Have you considered Tableau for interactive map generation? Yes. So I considered a few different dashboarding tools. Grafana has really good native mapping. The reason why I chose to do it in this way with Folium and doing it just in browsers like HTML and CSS and with JavaScript to load the map is because it's really lightweight. Um, if you run Grafana or Tableau or like any other service for generating maps, you need to host it. If you want to make it publicly available, you need to consider security. There are concerns around like people injecting malicious queries into live dashboards. With the HTML and CSS, it basically means that everyone is downloading the data and the tools they need to query it to their own machine in their browser. So it's much more lightweight on my like hosting budget, I guess, and it's much simpler to like maintain and secure. But Tableau would be a great way of doing this if you were distributing it to a smaller number of people.
Okay. Thank you very much. I just have one question I'll ask you. I know you considered active communities, and you also looked at communities that were inactive. Um, so where do you categorize? You have these new communities that are less than 6 months or less than 1 year, and how do you check if they are active or not? How do you categorize them? And what's the parameter? You can have a new community with large membership within a short possible time and with free event with impact. How do you what parameters did you use to
That's a
make your categorization? Yeah.
that's a great question. So a really good example of this would be PyData Hull. So PyData Hull is the newest PyData meetup in the UK, if not the world. And I was super lucky to get to speak there a few weeks ago. Um, when I was first building the map, like Hull popped up and it was showing as inactive because it hadn't had an event yet. And I was like, oh, this is kind of unfair because like Hull have just started. We should be like, they should be front and center in this map. Like people should know about them and their events. So I added a workaround into my code for like inactive versus active, which is groups only show as inactive if it's been 100 days since their last event. If they haven't had an event before, they always show as active, which meant that with my like blue-green like styling, brand new groups were like super bright green, like you can see them right away. They light up and they're really visible from a distance. So that was the approach I took. I think there are probably other more elegant ways of visualizing the data and of annotating it, but for me at least, I thought that was a good compromise for like making sure new groups are super visible, because I think new groups are probably the ones, other than inactive groups, are the ones that need the most support. Although, like I have to say, Hull is, having been to Hull, they are like thriving. They have a lot of members. Like it's really cool seeing how quickly that community has grown. Like you say, like it's a new community and it has a lot of members, and it's a great community.
Right. I mean, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please, your feedback is needed. Please, give us your feedback, on the portal at Meetup group. And then remember, the recording will be at the YouTube channel, PyData Milton Keynes. PyData Milton Keynes. Now let me hand over to Grace to wrap up. And
Thank you
Grace,
so
over
much,
to you.
Philip. Hugh, we are absolutely grateful to have had you on board. I must say it was an insightful session. I don't know if everyone would like to turn on their camera, if you would like to turn on your camera so that we can have a screenshot that we can share for just to create some memories on today's event. While we are waiting for us to do that, if we use any of the resources from today's talk to build a personal project of some kind, please, please, please share on LinkedIn, tag PyData Milton King, tag Hugh, and we can also reshare that to our community as well, just to shed some light on some of the good work that we are doing in house, and also to shed some light on the hard work that you will be doing. Let us see how many cameras has come on already. It looks like we do not want to put our cameras on, but not to worry. We are absolutely excited to have you on board. We are grateful that you've joined us on today's meetup. Please, please, please keep your eye out on our meetup page so that you can have more information on where the next event is going to be. And also the link to today's event recording will be on our YouTube channel. Let me see if somebody else has. I think everyone is having such a beautiful evening and thinking about today's talk that no one wants to come up with their camera, but not to worry, we're absolutely grateful to have you here. Like I said earlier, please, 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 if you use today's talk resources to create anything, personal project, you add it to some sort of workflow, if you would like, please tag us as well so that we can share and other people can benefit from what you have done. And also you can tag you as well. You would be excited to see some of his knowledge used for something else. Thank you so much for joining today, and you've got your time back. You have your evening back. Thank you for coming. Bye.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much. Bye.
Bye.
All right.